In Romans chapter 4, Paul is now going to prove that this idea that he lays out in chapter 3, that we're saved by faith, not by works, not by our obedience to the law, he's going to prove it out now in the life of Abraham, who was the most famous Jew of all time. He was the father of the Jews. Here's what he says: Abraham was, humanly speaking, the founder of our Jewish nation. So what did he discover about being made right with God? If his good deeds had made him acceptable to God, he would have had something to boast about. But that was not God's way. And it says this, verse 3, this is our key verse. For scriptures tell us that Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. So think of it, the Jews would have said that Abraham obeyed God, and God counted him righteous. In other words, God says that we're righteous. God allows us to be in a right relationship with him based on our obedience. And this is what Paul would have thought as a Pharisee, but now he realizes, and this is what he's revealing in these chapters, he said, no, it's not by our works or our obedience that we are made right with God. It is by believing God. And this isn't just true today, Paul says. This was even true in Abraham's day. This is what he's arguing for in this chapter. So let's read this next section. He says this in verse 11. Circumcision was a sign that Abraham already had faith, and that God already had accepted him and declared him to be righteous even before he was circumcised. Now you need to understand that circumcision was one of those basic laws that someone had to obey, and before, in the Old Testament, the Jewish people got the idea, and they wrongly got the idea, but they got the idea that God accepted people on the basis of things like being circumcised. And Paul is arguing that it was never that way, and it is still not that way. He says this, he says, so Abraham is the spiritual father of those who have faith but have not been circumcised. They're counted righteous because of their faith, not because of their works like circumcision. And Abraham is also a spiritual father of those who have been circumcised, the Jewish people, but only if they have the same kind of faith. You see the key word there, faith. It's more about faith than it is about circumcision. So he's speaking to Jews and Gentiles. What's more important is that you have the faith of Abraham, not the circumcision of Abraham. The faith of Abraham, not the lineage, the physical lineage of Abraham, but the spiritual lineage which comes through faith. So he says, so if you have that faith, whether you're Jew or Gentile, then you're a child of Abraham. Clearly, he says, God's promise to give the whole earth to Abraham and his descendants was based not on his obedience to the law. That promise came in Genesis 12. Go back and read that. But on the right relationship with God that comes by faith. And so this is what Paul is arguing, that even in the case of Abraham, it's not like God changed his mind and he used to care about works, and that's how we made it to God, and now he cares about faith. No, he says, even in the case of Abraham, the very father of Christianity, of the Jewish nation, even in his case, he was saved, he was made right by faith, just like he says in Romans chapter 3. So let's just end with one more. This is a great passage, or this whole verse, this whole chapter as you read it. But let's end with verse 23. It says, and when God counted Abraham as righteous, it wasn't just for his benefit. It was recorded for our benefit too, assuring us that God will also count us as righteous if we believe in him. Again, not if we obey him. It doesn't mean obedience is bad. Obedience is great. It's just that obedience doesn't make us right with God. It's about believing in God, the one who raised Jesus, our Lord, from the dead. So a great passage, a great chapter. He really drives home the point of salvation by grace through faith that he lays a case for in chapter 3, and he proves it now in the Old Testament and in Abraham's story in chapter 4. So now you're ready to read this chapter. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 5.